I'm going to turn this mask off for just a second because I like to try the object select tool and see just what it does. Well, the object select tool can pretty quickly find an object, and it only needs a little bit of addition here. The object select tool is a fairly new selection tool that I haven't had much experience with it, but it seems to work just fine. So you try the object selection tool for the carrot. Okay, I already have a mask, so I'm going to Command D, deselect that, and use this mask. Option R, reduce the edge detection and reduce the feather because it doesn't look that sharp to me. Command Shift I, invert the selection, and you fill the back with black. And Shift I, Control backspace, or Control delete to refill the foreground and make sure that I get a slightly more precise edge on that. We need to add a layer if we're going to do a non-destructive dodge and burn. That layer should be Shift function key 5 filled with 50% gray. This is at 100% opacity normal mode. So you don't want this to be 50%. You want this as 100%, but it's a 50% gray is the color. And say OK, and then change that to an overlay blending mode, which has no effect on any color, no effect on anything at 50% gray as an overlay. And I'm going to select both of these, Command G, group them. I'll add the carrot group. And in the carrot group, I'm going to drag this mask up to the group itself, because then I can dodge and burn on here and not have my dodging and burning spill off onto other things on the artboard or on the page. What I need to do is make it appear that this side has light on it, like all of the other objects. Make this a little bigger brush. I'm using the dodge tool. I'm going to dodge the shadows first. I'm at 16%, and I'm okay with that because I don't want to do this bombastically in one big jump. I want to gradually lighten this until it looks the way I think a carrot should look. I think that's not bad. I think I can go to the midtones now, and again, lighten the midtones some. Make sure this should be a soft brush, and then perhaps lighten the highlights some. And that looks like a lot. I'm going to go down to 10% exposure and just go across the edge of this. And see, I don't have to be right on the carrot. I can do that. I can have a wide brush and stay outside the carrot, so it's only spilling the dodge tool into the edge as far as I want it to go. And I might just, on the midtones, go back down the middle here. And then the burn tool, I want to darken the other side, and I think I'll do that in the same order. And again, I don't want it very hard edged. I want it to blend in. Using the open and close brackets on the keyboard to enlarge or reduce my brush on the fly. And let's see, so highlights, I'm going to darken the highlights along this side. Maybe a little bit into the middle. I'm going to make it a wider brush, go into the midtones. And again, I'm actually outside the mask, but I'm spilling in because of the feather on my brush. And in the shadows, a little bit more. Okay, let's zoom out and see if that's the carrot that I want. I think that's similar to the others. I'm going to go to the dodge tool again, and on the midtones, I might just go down the middle here again and lighten the midtones some more. Okay, that's a happy carrot. It might have been too much. Command Shift F. I'm going to reduce that to like 50%. It's 25%. Not sure I see that. It's a pretty subtle distinction. Okay, so there's my carrot. What do I want my carrot to do? Well, before I do my carrot, I'm going to add in a new background. We're done with the base layer. We don't need that, so I'm going to paint right over it. I'm going to use the gradient tool. I'm going to select a color from my art. With the gradient tool selected, if I hit the Alt key, I get the eyedropper. I could select, say, a nice yellow from my pepper. And then I could take a green from my carrot, or I could take the red from my tomato or my red pepper, or the orange of the carrot. I can flip these for a second, take the eyedropper and sample that orange. And then on this background layer with my gradient tool, I can click anywhere and drag to anywhere and get a gradient in there. That's interesting. Oh, there you go. It's in the labels. So in my labels, when I move the labels, it moved a mask. This one right here. You see the white bar across there? So I can drag a rectangular selection across there, and on that mask, Alt backspace or Option delete on the Mac. That's my foreground color is black. Fill that with black. I'll do the same for this just so they're consistent. So that's something else you may need to watch for. Another thing that sometimes happens is when someone makes a rectangular selection, such as when you're doing the cutting board, and then you do an edge shift. If you're not careful what you're doing with it, you may end up with a little faint white rectangle way outside your cutting board. You have to watch for that and make sure that you don't have that as something that's part of a mask that you didn't notice. I'm going to close these up. Okay, I've closed up the things that I'm not using. So getting back to gradients, there are different kinds of gradients. Just like the different gradients for fills in Illustrator, you can have a radial gradient like this. Probably don't want that color. Radial gradient like that. You can go the other way. You can have this one that is kind of a pyramid, kind of wraps around. You can have it go from background to foreground to background. You can have sort of a star. You can also change from foreground to background to foreground to white. Or excuse me, foreground. You can change from foreground to background to foreground to clear. So for example, if I'm using this one and I've got that star thing there, but I want to come in this way, there we see it. If I change this to green, you can see that it's going from foreground to transparent instead of from foreground to background. Undo that. Go back to pepper red. I could go across that way. I could go this way. I could go back to from foreground to background. Play around with that, decide what you want to do. It's entirely up to you, but I would like to see some sort of gradient background added to this layout. When you've done that, you can take the crop tool and cut this down to what you think is a good proportion for this book cover, poster, editorial illustration, whatever use this might be put to, and I'll accept that. Okay, the carrot would kind of like to have a shadow. The other thing it might like to have is it might like to be sharpened a little bit. So maybe I'll, within the group here, convert this layer for smart filters. And then add a sharpen filter. Go smart sharpen. And I'm going to assume that I have a lens blur here. And maybe I'll sharpen it that much. Let me see the preview. It looks a little better. I can increase the radius and that might sharpen it more. I'll say okay. Now, if I wanted to get that to appear to be going back in the distance, I could actually add in here a gradient mask. So I've got that selected and I'll drag this from black to white. And that should, although very subtly, make this go from sharp to not as sharp. And I don't really see it much there. If I did a more radical change, it'd be more noticeable. I'm just worried about a more radical change looking, well, too radical. I can click on this, double click on that. Perhaps I'll go extreme on this and say like 150% sharper. Yeah, I can see it. Okay. This is 150% sharper, but it has a mask on it. If I shift click on this, notice this is all sharp here with the mask. This is a little softer, it's a little sharper down here. It's kind of subtle, but it's a trick that you may want to use someday for something else. So you might as well give it a try here. I need to make a shadow for this, and this one's going to be a little tricky because I'm going to command click on that mask. add a layer that should be under the caret. And since the mask is on the caret group, it's going to have to be outside the group. Get down to here, there, okay. Well, again, I'm on mostly this green. I'm a little bit on this yellow here. Maybe I'll take the yellow, and that's 44 degrees. This is 69 degrees. I'm going to split the difference and say about, 69 and 44, it's around 103 or something. I'm going to say like about 50, 52, somewhere in there will be my color, but I want to be 180 degrees from there, so it's about 232. And that should be a color that should work okay for the green or the background that I chose down here. Shift function key 6, maybe a 15 pixel feather, and make sure I'm on, where'd it go? Right here, I'm going to stick a layer in, and Alt backspace, or on the PC option delete, or shift function key 5, fill with a foreground color. Lost my selection. Shift function key 6, 15 pixel. Okay, fill this now. Command D, deselect. So there's my shadow. Again, be off auto select so that I can be sure to select something that is hidden behind that. I'm going to have to modify that a number of ways. One, of course, is that it's got to be a multiply blending mode at maybe 50%, maybe 40%. Notice as it goes across these colors, it looks like a fairly natural shadow on the yellow and on the green because it's splitting the difference between the two of them as far as the true complement of those colors. I'm going to move this back here and Command T transform and warp and just see if I can get a warp on this that will make that shadow appear to go across the countertop and up the side and then across the cutting board. And it would be something like this. I might have to, I'm not sure if that's working exactly. If I right here, split the warp here, so I can bring these down flat over there, and then right here, I need it to go up the side so that it looks like the carrot's actually going across the counter. So the shadow's going across the counter and up the edge and then across the top of the surface again. And that's not perfect, but it's good enough for this exercise. So that's the whole thing. Once you have that, Command Shift S, save as your last name. I'm just going to make a note here that this is this semester. Don't do that. Just put your last name, DL6A, as a PSD with layers. And I just have to make one more little adjustment to this shadow. It just doesn't look quite right to me. Right click on this and let's try distort and just pull this part over here a little bit. But I think it'll do. So saved. Command Option I, see about how big it is. I want you to save this one in this form for yourself. And in case you feel the need to go back and change it, if I don't think you've done things as well as you could, if your masking could be improved, you'll want to go back to this high resolution original, but I don't want you to turn this in. I want you to give me a 72 pixel per inch version. at 100 pixels per inch. I just noticed that the instructions actually say both, which is confusing. So save it with layers at 100 pixels per inch or at 72 pixels per inch or something other than 300. Try 100 and see how big the file is. Well, that should be about 1/10 the size, so I think that'll be okay. And I will resample this bicubic sharper because I'm reducing the number of pixels. That's an equivalent loss in detail and size. And I'll say okay, and save this as your last name DL6A 100 to indicate that this is a 100 pixel per inch version of it with layers. This is the one I want you to submit because this is how I'll be able to see what layers you used and that all of your layers are properly functioning and that you've done masking and that all of your editing is non-destructive. So I'll save that. And you can see that it looks okay, but it's a smaller file. I'm going to reopen the high resolution one. In option I, you can see this is 300 pixels per inch at about 6 by 6.5. Command Shift S, save as a JPEG. JPEGs do not have layers. JPEGs will be a compact file. Save that. Now, why do we do this? I will look at the quality of your editing based on the 300 pixel per inch JPEG. I will look at whether or not you worked properly non-destructively by looking at the low resolution copy of your layered PSD file. So save yourself a high resolution copy at 300 pixels per inch at 6 by 6.5 or whatever size you came up with, but make a copy for me at 100 pixels per inch PSD with layers. It can also be a PDF. It could be a 100 pixel per inch PDF with layers. So send me those two, the 100 pixel per inch PDF or PSD with layers and the 300 pixel per inch at full size, 6 by 6.5 JPEG file, so that I have a high resolution non-layered image and I have a low resolution layered image. And that's all there is to that. Now, wouldn't you like to see that on the cover of a book on salad?